near contested reefs. All eyes on the Iran ceasefire deal. Will the two-week truce hold or collapse? Uncertainty remains. Meanwhile, vessels are lining up, waiting to resume delayed transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Among them are ships belonging to the Chinese Communist regime, which are also not receiving special treatment. We take a look at how the month-long disruption in the waterway reflects the state of China-Iran relations. NTD's Flora Hua has the story.
After briefly reopening the Strait of Hormuz, Iran says it is blocking the waterway again, blaming ongoing tensions between Israel and Lebanon. However, the White House says Lebanon was never part of the ceasefire deal. Also worth noting, China, a quiet yet critical player, is watching its relationship with Iran being tested throughout the conflict. In the first 24 hours of the ceasefire, only 7 ships were allowed through the Strait of Hormuz, with 4 of them being Chinese vessels. The remaining Chinese oil tankers were still lining up near the strait. Before the closure, Iran said ship owners must first secure permission from the regime and follow designated routes to avoid sea mines. It also warned that hefty tolls will be imposed on each ship transiting through the strait, and China is not getting any special treatment. Since the war began, some ships have tried to present themselves as Chinese-owned or crewed, hoping to reduce the risk of being targeted. Despite that, 2 Chinese ships were blocked from transiting the strait just a couple of weeks ago. An oil tanker heading to China last week was attacked by Iran. The Epoch Times reports that Iran turned down China's request to guarantee the safety of its vessels. Analysts say the move could be Tehran's way of pressuring Beijing for military support. In a press conference in Beijing Wednesday, Iran's ambassador called for China and Russia to help guarantee regional security. But neither countries responded. President Trump confirmed China's role in the ceasefire talks, highlighting Beijing's influence over Iran. A Hormuz shutdown would put nearly half of China's oil imports at risk, driving up costs and hitting the economy. China buys most of Iran's sanctioned oil, a lifeline for Tehran, but Beijing depends on that cheap supply too. Losing Iran and Venezuela means paying global prices. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Plastic prices are soaring in southern China. Rising oil costs fueled by Middle East tensions are to blame. Margins are shrinking and logistics are disrupted. Panic buying is spreading in a Chinese city known as the Plastic Town.
This is Zhangmutou, also known as China's Plastic City. Located east of Guangzhou, China's largest plastic trading hub has been feeling the sting of rising oil-linked costs driven by the Iran war. Plastic prices have risen sharply, squeezing margins, disrupting logistics, and fueling panic buying across the supply chain. Peng Xin, the general manager of a firm that manufactures plastic pellets, says costs have surged by about 60% since March. He also says his factory's safety stocks have been depleted with new raw materials being bought at elevated market prices, costs that he says would soon trickle down to customers. Zheng Bin, marketing manager at an online trading and pricing platform for plastic raw materials, said firms have been stocking up in preparation for a longer-lasting Iran war.
With the Middle East situation unlikely to ease in the next 1 or 2 months, panic has driven people to actively stock up. Upstream petrochemical plants without crude oil and feedstock to produce with have also been forced to raise their prices.
The rush to secure supplies has also clogged warehouses and roads. Warehouse owner Han Bing says this year is the busiest year he's ever seen, with daily turnover doubling to about 1,000 tons from around 500 tons previously.
At the peak, after March 5, Zhangmutou was gridlocked for nearly a week. Traffic jams stretched about 6 to 9 miles. Every warehouse was packed to capacity, and both inbound and outbound cargo were heavily affected.
China is the world's largest plastic producer, consumer, and exporter of final plastic products, according to a 2025 report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Top House Republicans are sounding the alarm on Chinese Communist Party influence inside the U.S. Chairman of the House Select Committee on China are calling on the Treasury Department and IRS to investigate tax-exempt organizations with alleged ties to Beijing. John Molinar and Jason Smith are warning that groups tied to the Chinese Communist Party may be exploiting nonprofit status to interfere in U.S. politics. A New York Times investigation found at least 53 of these organizations endorsed or raised money for political candidates, potentially violating federal law. Lawmakers say some of these groups have also been used to pressure or silence critics of the Chinese regime, including political candidates. The concerns come as Congress increases scrutiny of foreign influence operations targeting American institutions. The lawmakers are now demanding a briefing by April 22nd on what steps the IRS is taking to address the threats. Social media giant TikTok is seeking a dismissal of a New York case that accuses the company of harming users' mental health. The short video platform is no longer China-owned, but its algorithm is still tied to ByteDance, TikTok's former parent company based in China. The algorithm is directly linked to users' mental health. NTD's Arlene Richards has more on Wednesday's proceedings.
But isn't it a product?
A New York appellate panel of judges on Wednesday hearing arguments over whether the state of New York can sue TikTok on behalf of the platform's users. TikTok argues that only people who are harmed can bring claims. To answer the question of whether a state can sue TikTok, the courts have to grapple over whether the state's case is about the content posted on TikTok, in which case the company would be immune from liability under the First Amendment, or the design of the platform and its algorithms, which may arguably be called a product.
The TikTok itself, is that not a product?
No, TikTok is
the algorithm.
Platform. The algorithm, that's all a publication mechanism, a service under New York law compared to a product.
Does the First Amendment protect human beings or artificial intelligence?
As you're gathering together things based upon the user and what the user has exhibited some interest in, and then feeding that directly to the user.
New York is one of a coalition of 14 state attorneys general who filed lawsuits in 2024 against TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance. They are accusing the social media platform of harming young users' mental health while deceiving the public about its dangers. New York State Supreme Court ruled last May that Attorney General Letitia James could sue the platform and rejected TikTok's request for a dismissal of the case. In Wednesday's proceeding, the New York attorney explained why the algorithm is a product and not related to free speech.
But how do we get past that being like speech from different people just pulled together in a way that they say is interesting versus it being an actual product?
So I think that this is a product in the same way like a child's toy would be, a child's entertainment or a child's toy would be a product.
Since the platform's U.S. operations were sold to a group of American investors in January, concerns have remained over whether its algorithm could still manipulate content on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. The chairman of the House Select Committee on the CCP, Congressman John Molinar, recently told Cliff May on the Foreign Policy podcast that he wasn't satisfied that TikTok's parent company ByteDance still owns a minority stake in the U.S. operations.
There's a lot of unanswered questions. To your point about the algorithm, to what degree does ByteDance still have control of that algorithm? And how secure is the data when it comes to Americans' data?
In the New York case, the panel didn't rule on Wednesday. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
A mysterious Chinese drone recovered in Indonesia. A Chinese underwater drone has been pulled from fishing nets near the country's waters on Thursday. Officials say it could be part of Beijing's broader efforts to map key undersea routes. A fisherman pulled the 12-foot torpedo-shaped device from waters near a tourist island of Lombok. Military authorities are now analyzing the object, and photos suggest it could be a Chinese-made underwater surveillance drone. The recovery happened near the Lombok Strait, a strategic waterway connecting Southeast Asia to waters near Australia. The area is seen as critical in any future regional conflict between the U.S. and China. And the information about the seafloor is vital for submarine operations. Indonesian officials say they are working to determine its origin, purpose, and whether it contains any stored data. Even if it's used for civilian research, experts say information gathered on seabed conditions could still have military value. It follows reports that the Philippines has found similar Chinese underwater drones in recent years, also caught in fishing nets in strategic waters. The Philippines ramping up its presence in the disputed South China Sea. It unveiled a major new Coast Guard base on a contested island as tensions with China continue rising. Officials say the new facility will strengthen Manila's ability to protect its sovereignty. But just hours later, Philippine authorities accused Chinese forces of firing warning flares at one of their aircraft, calling it a dangerous act of intimidation. The Philippines officially opened a new Coast Guard command center on Thitu Island Thursday, reinforcing its presence in the South China Sea. The base will be staffed by Coast Guard personnel and supported by patrol ships and aircraft. Chinese Coast Guard and government-linked vessels are regularly seen patrolling nearby waters. It will expand the Philippines' ability to monitor activity, enforce maritime law, and respond to Chinese aggression. The move comes as Beijing continues to assert claims over nearly the entire South China Sea, despite an international ruling rejecting those claims. And just hours after the unveiling, tensions escalated. The Philippine Coast Guard says Chinese forces fired flares at one of its patrol aircraft during a routine mission. It occurred around Subi and Mischief Reefs, areas currently occupied by China just west of the Philippines. Officials say the aircraft was also warned over radio transmissions in which Beijing claimed indisputable sovereignty. The Philippines called the encounter reckless and a clear act of harassment. North Korea fired multiple ballistic missiles toward the sea off its east coast, but something went wrong mid-flight. The missiles showed signs of abnormality and then disappeared.
The Japan Coast Guard said the missile fell into the sea about 10 minutes later. Tokyo said no missile entered its territorial waters or exclusive economic zone. On Tuesday, a separate launch was detected near Pyongyang. Citing military officials, South Korea's Yonhap news agency said that it was probably a ballistic missile. The agency said that missile flew eastward before showing signs of an abnormality and disappearing. The incident marked North Korea's 4th, 5th, and 6th ballistic missile launches this year, following 2 in January and a 3rd in March. Analysts say the launches could reflect routine weapons development and may be linked to ongoing engine and propulsion testing, including work on solid fuel systems. Pyongyang has been seeking to upgrade its strike capability with solid fuel missiles that are often easier and safer to operate and require less logistical support than liquid-fueled weapons. South Korea's Presidential Blue House convened an emergency National Security Council meeting on Wednesday. Media reports say it called the earlier launches a provocation that violated UN Security Council resolutions.
Coming up, a massive breach hits China's supercomputer network. A hacker allegedly stole a vast amount of sensitive data from a state-run computing center, including military and missile-related research. And Birthright citizenship at the center of a major legal fight before the Supreme Court. That comes after President Trump pushed to end it, citing exploitation by wealthy Chinese nationals. A former U.S. assistant attorney weighs in.
Dual citizenship, or whatever you want to call it, created by birthright citizenship, means that, for instance, in the case of Iranians with a sworn allegiance to the Islamic Republican Guard, or Chinese with allegiance to the CCP, that they can affect elections.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A hacker has allegedly stolen a massive amount of sensitive data from a Chinese state-run supercomputer. It could be one of the largest breaches ever tied to China. CNN reported the claims on Wednesday. The data is said to include sensitive military research, missile-related documents, and other high-level scientific work. Experts believe it may have come from a major Chinese computing center serving thousands of users, including defense and research agencies. Cybersecurity experts say the hacker may have quietly gained access through a weak point in the network. They say data was then pulled out over several months without being detected. The hacker posted samples on Telegram and later claimed full access was being sold for a large amount of money in crypto. CNN could not verify the claims, but spoke with experts who say they appear credible. If true, the breach could expose a serious weakness in China's computing systems as it competes with the U.S. in tech and AI. President Trump has been pushing to end birthright citizenship, citing concerns about wealthy Chinese nationals exploiting the policy on American soil. Now, the Supreme Court is weighing a major case that could reshape it. For more insight, NTD Steve Land spoke with former Assistant U.S. Attorney Jim Trusty. Take a look.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. The first is that a lot of people regarded this whole conflict, this whole issue about birthright citizenship as kind of a fever dream of the extreme right, that it was crazy to even try to revisit it. And I think we can put that to rest. So President Trump, in my book, deserves some credit for highlighting this issue, the modern implications of birthright citizenship, as dire as they are, and for creating a circumstance where it went to the Supreme Court. And I think most people would agree it's not obvious where they're going to come out. There's times where oral argument tells you, oh, this is going to be 6-3 or 9-0. I don't think it's that clear here. The conservatives are looking for examples, and Justice Alito pulled one out from Scalia that said, look, if you have a general rule, you're still allowed to modify it to fit the circumstances of change. And back then in the 1860s, you didn't have a federal immigration policy. You didn't have jets where billionaires were sending Chinese soon-to-be mothers to the Marianas Islands to quickly have birth and then suddenly have citizenship. And so my last big takeaway is, the reason this is such a serious issue is because that dual citizenship, or whatever you want to call it, created by birthright citizenship, means that, for instance, in the case of Iranians with a sworn allegiance to the Islamic Republican Guard, or Chinese with allegiance to the CCP, that they can affect elections. They can be a national security threat, but they can contribute dark money to U.S. elections because of their citizenship. And that's something worth addressing. So again, I'm not sure how it turns out. I don't think anybody can predict it cleanly, but I think President Trump was right to raise it.
You bring up many great points, Jim. I mean, from how I understand it, the 14th Amendment was ultimately specifically instituted as a civil rights measure for the children of former slaves. Does the original intention of the amendment matter now? And talk to us about what you just unpacked there. We're talking about tens or hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals having this major operation to have children born here, raising them in communist China under that ideology, and then free to come back here and vote when they're grown up and brainwashed. How do we square all of this?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's 9 people are going to tell us how to square it, because some of them are going to put complete stock in the state of affairs and the language that was chosen for the 14th Amendment, shortly after the Civil War. If we didn't have a problem, if we didn't have this problem of mixed loyalty at best with, Chinese manipulation of a loophole, frankly, then I don't think this would be quite the battle it was. But again, I think Justice Alito was not wading specifically into every story that's out there, whether it's thousands, tens of thousands, or over a million of kind of newfound citizens based on this loophole. But it's there, and it affects the thinking. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I think Alito and Thomas are aware of the ramifications of not allowing the 14th Amendment to prohibit this kind of gamesmanship, manipulation by China in particular.
Jim, the ACLU's legal director who spoke in court today outlined her interpretation of the impact of the 14th Amendment. Let's have a listen to what she said. Looks like we're not going to be able to bring that up, but in a nutshell, she said something along the lines of, the thought of my parents and so many of our parents and ancestors who came to the country seeking refuge, seeking new opportunities. We've had, these people in the country for 50 years, 150 years, that everyone born here is a United States citizen, all alike. Jim, how do you respond to Americans who are sympathetic to the view that she was trying to express here?
Well, I think it's largely just outdated. I think it's a lovely picture, but what we're faced with now is really a national security threat and an election integrity threat. And that is large-scale, temporary interloping into the United States simply to get citizenship and then to return home. There's no semblance of loyalty or interest in being in America by the people that are doing this. And you've got Chinese billionaires, for instance, financing this. So they've set up a system to create essentially Manchurian candidates, for lack of a better phrase, to have people that can influence elections, that can vote, that can donate, that can form PACs, that can pour dark money into American elections. And that's just the modern day boots on the ground reality of what we're facing. So it's not about retroactively trying to attack everyone who was seeking the American dream and domiciled here and took time to try to make themselves legal. It's literally the birthright tourist industry that is a serious threat. And that I think the only way to change it comprehensively is to read a little bit of modern day practice into a law from the 1860s.
Jim Trusty, as always, appreciate your legal insights. Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For On the Clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.